I'm going to show you how to graft stitches in knitted garter stitch. Grafting is simply a technique that uses a tapestry needle to create a row of knitting where one didn't exist before. If you do it well, you can't even tell that the row is grafted instead of knit. For a closer look at the construction of garter stitch and how to recognize the stitches in rows, check out my video, How to Measure Gauge in Garter Stitch. Since we're going to be using grafting to create a row, one side of my piece needs to be shorter by one row than the other piece. Take a look at these two garter stitch swatches. I've marked the right side of the swatches to help us keep track of the right and wrong sides. I have the same number of stitches on each piece because I'm going to be joining stitch to stitch. On the green swatch, I used a long tail cast on and I knit 7 rows. I ended by knitting a wrong side row and I've turned the work ready to knit a right side row. The blue swatch, I used a long tail cast on and knitted 6 rows, 1 less than on the green swatch. I would be ready to turn and knit a wrong side row. Instead, I'm going to join the pieces together by grafting the live stitches on the blue swatch to the live stitches on the green swatch, and that grafting row will take the place of the next row in blue. If you've lost track of whether you're on a right side row or a wrong side row or exactly where you are, take a look at the stitches themselves. You can see on this green swatch the stitches are sitting right up close to the needle. I can even turn it around and see that on the other side those stitches, that what I call the frownies, are not sitting up as high on the needle. Compare that to this blue swatch where the stitches are sitting down a little bit more relaxed. I can turn it around and see that on these two the stitches are sitting up high on the needle. When the stitches are sitting right up close to the needle, that's my clue that I have finished a completed garter stitch ridge. One final thing to check. Make sure that your stitches are seated correctly on the needle. You want to make sure that the front loop of the stitch is going to be the leading edge of the stitch. Otherwise, your stitches will become twisted. So double check to make sure that all your stitches are seated correctly on the needle. While you can certainly graft with the stitches off the needle or from a waste yarn holder, I find it easiest to do with the stitches on the knitting needle. Cut your yarn tail or a separate piece of yarn at least 3 times the width of the row to be grafted. I'm going to be using the blue yarn, so I've cut a long yarn tail to use for my grafting. If you're going to be grafting long pieces like an afghan or a shawl edge, instead of cutting a really long yarn tail, you may want to use several separate strands of grafting yarn as you go. You don't want that strand to be too long because you don't want to have to pull the yarn through too many times, which can weaken the yarn. Thread the tapestry needle with your yarn and then pick up the work and hold it with wrong sides together. I'm going to turn my blue swatch around so that the wrong sides are facing each other and the right sides are on the outside. And my shorter piece, the blue swatch that is 1 row shorter, is in the back. Insert the yarn needle purlwise through the first stitch on the front needle and then purlwise into the first stitch on the back needle and pull the yarn through. Make sure that the yarn goes around the tip of the front needle, not over the tip of the front needle. Now I'll come back to the front and work in pairs of stitches. I'll go knitwise into the first stitch and drop that stitch off, and then purlwise into the next stitch and leave it on and pull my yarn through. Now I'll do the same thing on the back needle. I'll go knitwise into the first stitch and drop it off and then purlwise into the second stitch, leave it on, and draw the yarn through. And if your yarn tail starts getting caught up, just move it out of the way and make sure the working yarn is going around the end of your front needle. Now move the yarn back to the front and do the same thing. Knitwise in the first stitch, purlwise in the next stitch, and draw my yarn through. Move to the back, knitwise and off, purlwise leave on, and draw the yarn through. Right now, I'm not worried too much about getting the tension exactly right. You can see those stitches are a little bit loose. We'll tighten them up in just a minute after we do a few more stitches. I'm going back to the front now. Knitwise drop off, purlwise leave on, and draw the yarn through. Let's do one more pair of stitches. Knitwise, drop off, purlwise, leave on, and draw the yarn through. Now that I've done a few stitches, let's stop and take a look at what is happening. You can see that I'm creating a nice row of what looks like garter stitches right through here, but my tension is not even. That's because I told you not to worry too much about how far or how tightly you pull that yarn through. Every few stitches I'm going to stop and adjust that tension as I go. I don't want to wait until the end, but it's easier to do 3 or 4 stitches at a time. I can move my stitches a little further along my needle so I don't lose them off the end. And now I want to make these stitches, the tension of these stitches, the same as the rest of the knitting. I can just follow the path of that yarn, that grafted yarn, and use my tapestry needle to tighten that up. You can see that one piece of yarn goes up and down, in and out. I don't want to make it too tight because I really want it to be invisible. I want to be careful not to split my yarn when I'm pulling it up. So every few stitches I'm going to adjust and then take a look and see if I'm happy with the tension there. I actually think I could make it a little bit tighter. I may come back and do that in a few minutes. I can tell I finished by doing a pair of stitches in the back because my working yarn is in the back. So now I know it's time to go around to the front, go in knitwise, jump off, purlwise leave on. And I'll just continue to do that for a few more stitches and then go back and adjust my tension. I've done a few more stitches and it's time for me to go back and adjust my tension, but before I do these big stitches, I need to examine what I've done over here. I think I can make those first stitches just a tiny bit tighter. And just work along to here, and then these certainly need to be tighter. Again, not tight, I'm trying to match the tension of the surrounding stitches. I want it to be 100% invisible when I'm finished. Then I'll continue doing that all the way across the row. Here I left off with a front stitch, so I know I go onto the back and do a pair of stitches. As I come to the end, and I have my last pair of stitches here, I'm going to go back into this first stitch knitwise and drop it off, and go into the last stitch knitwise and drop it off as well. And there I have my grafted row, but again I need to go back now and adjust these stitches so they are completely invisible. Let me do that and show you what it looks like when I finished.